look at matters further afield. It's been more than a year and 8 months since Russia invaded Ukraine. And while it received huge global media attention initially, of late it's been somewhat sidelined by the war in the Middle East. However, Ukraine continues to be bombarded by Russia. In fact, just yesterday, the capital, Kyiv, came under an attempted missile attack for the first time in months. This week, a delegation of civil society leaders from Ukraine is visiting South Africa, and I'm joined in studio by two of them. Kateryne Rashevska is a legal expert at the Center for Human Rights in Ukraine. Thank you for joining us. And Professor Olexiy Haran is a professor of comparative politics at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy University. I hope I've got that right. All right.
Yes.
Thanks very much to both of you. Prof, I'm going to start with you from a sort of political point of view. What is the latest on the war in Ukraine? And does Ukraine still have the ongoing military support of many other countries?
Yes, we have with this support for which we are thankful, because we need to defend our countries. And you are right that Russians continue to bombard Ukraine, bombard Ukrainian civilians. Look, even while we are here, we receive the signals of alarms on our phones. So today there was alarm all over Ukraine. Yesterday there were 2 alarms. Actually today the hospital in Kherson was bombarded by Russians, and there were persons killed, and newborn child was wounded. So yeah, they continue to do that. So we have this support, but look, it's not enough to defend ourselves, because we are talking about necessity to have elaborated air defense systems just to protect our civilians. And also we need this support to continue our counter-offensive. So we are thankful for all the support that we have received, but again, we need additional weapons, unfortunately, not to attack Russia, but to defend ourselves.
What is the purpose of your visit here to South Africa, bearing in mind that South Africa has not condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
That's an interesting point, because actually when the aggression started, there was a statement, very powerful statement by Dirka, and it's still on the side of...
It was withdrawn very quickly.
No, it was... I believe it's there. It's still there. But look, you are right. Your country abstained during the UN resolutions on territorial integrity of Ukraine. However, we see now the positive development since the visit of President Ramaphosa and other African presidents to Kyiv. And look, while they were in Kyiv, Kyiv was bombarded by Russians, and they knew that they were in Kyiv. So presidents had to go to shelter. I believe it was a clear sign by Russia who wants peace and who doesn't want peace. So the purpose of the visit actually is to increase our ties, increase understanding about what's going on in Ukraine, and on the other side to receive information from you. How do you see the war, and how we can combine our efforts in order to reach the peace? Because again, we are thankful for South Africa, because South Africa is represented during the meetings, 3 meetings of national security advisors to presidents that were held in Copenhagen, in Jeddah, and recently in Malta. So more than 60 countries attended, and they discussed these different aspects of 10 points of Ukrainian peace formula. And the South Africa said that they would like to work on return of the children who were deported from Ukraine to Russia.
And with that in mind, actually, let me bring in Kateryne Rashevska. Kateryne, your speciality is in human rights. We've been hearing about these children. Russia says they took the Ukrainian children out of villages to protect them before they went in militarily. You've been working with a lot of groups around this issue. How many children are involved? What is your perspective? What are you seeing on the ground?
So according to the information of Ukraine, we have already 19,546 Ukrainian children identified as unlawfully deported or forcibly transferred by Russian agents. And of course, the Russian Federation is trying to explain that it was not an international crime, it was evacuation or recreation or medical assistance and so on. However, you know, if Russians would like only to save, to rescue our children, why all this imposition of Russian citizenship, circumscription or attempt to circumscribe our children to Russian army, brainwashing, political indoctrination, militarization? Why, if they would like only survive our children?
Are you saying over 19,000 Ukrainian children have been taken?
It is only identified. However, we can talk even about like more than 50,000 of children, because exactly we don't understand how many children became orphans in Mariupol, for example, or in other cities sieged by Russians. So it's really difficult to count all of them. Only Russia knows how many children they have deported.
It's interesting that Ukraine provides this figure, verified figure. Russians themselves are giving larger figures, so they do not conceal it at all.
So this is the thing. I mean, if we look at what's happening in Gaza, horrific. I mean, obviously the attack on Israel was utterly awful, terrible. But what's happening in Gaza, over 10,000 people killed, most of them civilians, so many of them children. We're hearing about the situation at the hospitals in Gaza where there's no power. I think a number of babies have already died. Do you feel, Kateryna, that the plight of Ukrainian children is now being ignored? Or is it just it's not in the headlines, but there's still a lot of work being done?
So, of course, we can't and we shouldn't compare sufferings of these children and other children. And of course, we need to continue to maintain Ukrainian children in the focus of the international community. And this mediatization helped us exactly to obtain arrest warrants for Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova. So, of course, we need to continue our efforts, and we shouldn't forget Ukrainian children. And for us, it's really, really important. We need to repatriate all of them.
How many have been repatriated? Do you have you been able to?
Only 386 Ukrainian children were returned, and it was with extremely with many obstacles created by Russians. So their legal representatives, their biological parents, they were forced to pass a DNA test, to pass a lie detector test. They were even they were subjected to forced nudity or unlawful confinement. So it was after all these sufferings, and I know one case where one boy started crying when his mother testified about all this suffering during the process of his repatriation.
So this is a question to both of you, but I'll start with you because I know that you focused on humanitarian laws, and if we look at the United Nations and all the humanitarian laws and the rules around engagement and war and who should be left out, it seems that when it comes to the crunch, countries who want to break the rules with impunity. Do you have faith in the United Nations to stop human rights abuses in global conflicts?
Frankly speaking, it's a very difficult question because, as you know, Virginia Gamba, special representative of the Secretary General, was a unique person accepted by Russians on the territory of the Russian Federation. However, she refused to visit Ukrainian children because, according to her, it was not under her mandate because these children were not abducted. However, it is not true. These children were really abducted, and we can recognize it and we should recognize it. However, I still believe in the United Nations and in this power of many countries. We need to push the Russian Federation to at least provide the full list of children unlawfully deported and forcibly transferred, for example, to Russian foster families, because without it, without fulfillment of this obligation, it would be impossible to repatriate them.
And Prof. Haran, just to bring you in again, do you have faith in the various attempts to try and sort the situation out, whether it's the United Nations or what we've seen with South Africa and other countries involved in trying to broker peace? Is there any significant sense of moving forward?
It is significant and it's possible, but we need to understand that just calling for peace will not help. just calling for, let's have ceasefire, will not, because Putin is occupying Ukrainian territory, 1/5 of Ukrainian territory. You call for ceasefire. Okay, Putin will be happy about it, to continue to control Ukrainian territory and to do all this, to continue to do all these crimes. So what we need actually is try to push Russia in different areas to set back. For example, by revealing crimes, well, restoring the grain deal, for example, which is important for African countries. Russia withdrew from grain deal, right? Because we have now the largest nuclear station in Europe, which is occupied by Russian troops. And this is very dangerous for everybody in the world. So we need to raise this issue and to push Russians to withdraw. So I think here international support is important.
Are you both based in Kyiv?
Yes.
What is life like in Kyiv these days? I mean, is it normal in any sense of the word?
Look, you know, people are adjusted to live, right? If we are talking about the life in Kyiv, I would say that it looks like normal, unless you have these air alarms and unless you have air strikes. But we have good air defense system around Kyiv. So now it's more or less, I would say, okay compared to first months of the war. But if we are talking about, we cannot, you know, close the skies all over Ukraine. So the situation is much more difficult in other cities, and especially to those cities which are close to the front line. For example, we have air alarm when Russian missiles are in the air. So in Kyiv, we have time to prepare for that. But for example, in Kharkiv, which is 40 kilometers from Russian border, no, they don't have time even to hide. So the situation there is much more dangerous.
You've drawn parallels between South Africa's struggle for freedom and what you call Russia's colonial ambitions. And in fact, French President Emmanuel Macron actually also used the same phrase, saying that Russia was trying to colonize Ukraine. Recolonize, yes. Does it surprise you that South Africa has taken the stance of neutrality? But if you look deeper into the ANC policy, it's clear that it's pro-Russia, when in fact, during the USSR times, a lot of ANC cadres were actually trained in Ukraine when it was part of the USSR. Does it surprise you that South Africa is taking the stance it has? Do you believe they can be an honest broker? Do they even have the clout? Perhaps is it someone like China who needs to be pushing more?
Look, first of all, during this meeting, during this visit, we are going to meet with people from the ANC, hopefully, and we hope to discuss these issues frankly. Again, as I have said, you know, every country has its own history, its tradition, and its own understanding of international politics. So it's not for us to tell South Africa or any other countries what to do.
Fair point.
Our task is to inform you and present our perspective. So that's the main task here. And on the other hand, you know, we need to hear your position and then to discuss and debate. But you know, it's necessary to, as I have mentioned, I believe it was very important for President Ramaphosa and other African leaders to come to Kyiv to watch, to feel and to hear. And then they came to Moscow and they had the same possibility, and then to compare the reactions. So I think we may have different approaches, but it's necessary to have more facts and information in order to judge and to make the final decision. And I believe that there are things which are common, both for South Africa and
You're not coming here to lay
Ukraine.
down the law, you're coming here for dialogue. We're totally out of time, but I know you want to say one last quick thing, Kateryne.
And in some fields, we shouldn't only talk the talks, we must also walk the walks. That is why in this question of repatriation of Ukrainian children, we still do not have enough time in order to think about something. We need to react, and South Africa has all the possibility to push the Russian Federation to comply with this obligation and also to return Ukrainian children, I hope.
All right, well, best of luck in your discussions and your visit this week in South Africa, and thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you
into
very much.
studio. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Very good.
Donkey.
Buy a donkey, Kosi. Thanks to my guest, Kateryne Rashevska, a legal expert at the Center for Human Rights in Ukraine, and also Professor Olexiy Haran, Professor of Comparative Politics at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Do stay